morning, dear people of the internet, and welcome to welcome to your weekly moment of diving into internet drama. And this week, we really need to talk about the gigantic drama surrounding Hank Green and the knitting community for some reason. I never thought those two things that I like would come together like this, so we need to talk about it. It's about a SciShow video that Hank Green made called Physicists Don't Understand Why Knitting Works, which is a weird title because knitters understand how knitting works, and you should just ask knitters. I need to interject here because I was editing, because I procrastinated that because I had a personal issue last week, so I did not post a video for a week. This video was supposed to come out last week, and then it was supposed to come out yesterday. But what happened yesterday, while I was looking to screenshot a comment on the SciShow video that I hadn't screenshotted before, which was I should have done that because the video is now privatized, which says a lot about the situation. So I wanted to let you know beforehand, and also I'm still gonna post this video because I think it's still relevant in the greater scheme of the internet and just all that happens. And I still think that even with this and a statement that SciShow issued, which I will read you at the end of the video because I would like to keep stuff in chronological order as much as possible, but I still think it's important because there is still lacking a nuanced view on this conversation, and I am hoping to provide that to you. And also, unrelated, but if you want to help a student out for the college, art school, and just like my videos, please subscribe and watch my videos because that helps a lot and it's free. And if you want something that's not free, I crochet plushies and I sell them online, and you can find my website in the description. There's also zines and prints and bookmarks on there that I made, which are very cool. I like them a lot. I hope you will. Okay, anyways, and also since the video is deleted, you cannot fact check me anymore, but you can because someone else made a video going through the entire video. I don't like the tone of the video a lot. I will get back to that later in this video, but I will link it back to the video. Anyhow, I crochet a lot and I like knitting socks and other things too, so I thought I would be the perfect person to talk about this. There have been a lot of responses to the original video from Hank Green that felt a little off to me, so I'm not just going to react to what Hank is saying because people have already done that and you can watch that, but I'm going to explain to you why this drama even exists, what it is about, and what I think about it, because people make it really unnuanced and it should be nuanced. I'm also not a scientist, however I am a musicologist, which in my case means that I know a lot about internet culture and gender studies, which will be relevant, and I think that knitting is super cool and important, and also crocheting, but this is about knitting specifically. The SciShow video in short is about knitting fabric and how there's weird folds in knitting fabric that can be helpful for like packing materials or soundproofing fabrics, which is really interesting and cool. I think it's really important to note that SciShow video is about the physics behind knit fabric and not about knitting as a craft. That might also be the reason, however, why this statement...
One of the oldest knit objects in the world is a sock that's about 800 years old. It was a simple thing, a pattern of knots in the shape of a cylinder with a bend toward the end for the heel.
Which is about knitting as a craft, might have been a bit of a dork move. A lot of knitters on the internet fell over the fact that Hank called knitting a sock easy. The problem with that is that knitting a sock is actually really complicated. That can be scientifically proven by the fact that these socks exist. This is my first pair of socks I ever knit, like last year. They have 7 holes in them combined that I had to patch up last week. Mind you, these socks are again not even a year old. And that was because of the stitches I dropped in the process of making these. However, I think that Hank was talking about this. This is a sock, and you really immediately recognize that this is a sock, hopefully, but it's really easily recognizable, and the concept of a sock is simple. Drawing a face is a lot harder. So like knitting a sock might seem easy because it's just a tube with the bend, but it isn't. I do understand that the words knitting and simple in the same sentence might evoke an emotional response from the knitting community, which is valid because knitting has been set away as a very simple craft rather than an intricate art for basically forever. So knitters, including myself, are very much done with hearing that. I will get back to that later on, but first we need some more context. In the same introduction, Hank also says this.
Now perhaps knitting doesn't fill you to the brim with excitement. I get this.
Which sparked even more anger within the knitting community. Because knitting is something to be excited about. Now this is a very two-sided thing because on one hand, not everyone has to like your hobby or craft or livelihood or whatever you do and has to be excited about that. So So I don't think that being mad on someone who doesn't like your whatever you do is valid, because it's gonna happen for everyone at some point that someone doesn't like what they're doing. That's just life. No one likes everything. The other side is, however, that knitting is highly associated with grandmas, boring, and dustiness. So this not enthusiastic quote can be heard as validating that association. It's another thing that knitters have heard a lot in their life, like every knitter has, including myself. So it's not nice to hear, and we don't like to hear that. It's just very annoying. Anyhow, I think it's okay to say that knitting is not the most exciting thing ever to a lot of people, even with this context, as long as you acknowledge that knitting is not just an old person's hobby. And looking at knitting from another point of view, like this video is providing, might actually be helpful to the people who didn't think knitting was a very exciting thing. So the science perspective on knitting instead of the craft/art angle to knitting might actually help the knitting community. Speaking of grandma hobby associations, knitting and fiber arts in general have been associated with women having something to do at home while they wait for their husbands to get home from work a lot. So women, and just women doing nothing for basically forever. Well, science has been associated with men for also basically forever, and is therefore seen as more serious than clothes making. Now, there has been a lot of change in like the past 50 years or so, but the association still exists. This is important because a lot of knitters have interpreted this SciShow video as scientists swooping in and saying like, oh hey, your craft is actually interesting to science. Let us come in and take over because you don't understand what you're doing. Whilst knitting actually involves skills like math and physics, which you learn over the years through practice. Like, I put together this sweater. I don't know what the math is, but I had to learn it in a practical way to do it, which took years and years of practice, because otherwise I wouldn't have had this sweater. It fits me and keeps me warm. This is not a knit sweater, it's a crocheted sweater, but engineering-wise, potato, you know? People on the internet have been calling the SciShow video misogynistic with the understanding of the history context, and I sort of get that. Knitting women in the park have been used during World War II to make coded messages in their knitting by the Alliance, and none of the German Nazis were like, oh hey, they are dangerous and doing something, because they seem so innocent because they're just knitting. And the Nazis were very suspicious of basically everyone during that time. It's very cool that that was a possibility, but it also illustrates the point here because knitting women have been seen as innocent. To be honest, the first time I watched the SciShow video, I was like, what are these knitters even talking about? Because he doesn't even use gendered language even once in this video. And I was frustrated with the mad knitters. I still am, but we'll get to that. Anyhow, I didn't want to accidentally become a misogynistic a-hole, because I try my best to be a feminist, and misogyny is bad. So I asked my friends, who knows a lot about psychology, about their view on this situation, which they hadn't seen anything about yet, and that was very helpful. So I'm going to tell you what they told me. As I just told you, fiber arts have a history of being seen as a simple craft for women. And as a fiber artist, you still get told that your work is way too expensive, or that it's for grandmas, or if someone can buy you the yarn and then you will make them an entire blanket, which is like a month's worth of work if you're quick about it. It's like hundreds of hours of work. That are just comments that are very condescending. And these comments also root in misogyny, even if it's unconscious. I've heard every single one of these comments directed towards me, and they make me mad. So it makes sense to me that people are mad when the internet is already a misogynistic dumpster fire, when a man comes on and explains about knitting, or maybe even mansplains, as people have been saying, according to them. I don't agree with that, but I understand why people feel like that, and also puts knitting and simple in the same sentence. People are alert, and that's not a bad thing, especially since Hank didn't even mention the misogyny in the history of knitting. Luckily, there have been two responses, one from the SciShow team and one from Hank himself, so let's go through those. The SciShow response reads as following. Hi SciShow viewers, my name is Jess. I'm one of the SciShow's producers, and like a lot of you, to our delight, a knitter. It's been exciting to see the engagement on this video. Since we do have a couple of knitters on the team, including the video script editor, we wanted to take the opportunity to talk through some of the gaps in the video that viewers have identified. This response comes to you in two parts. Me as a knitter responding to the video's mistakes and clarifying where I can, and me as a SciShow producer talking about expertise, trial, and error. First of all, a lot of people had an issue with the fact that this response has been written by Jess and not by Hank Green himself, but you have to remember that SciShow is a company, and I believe that Hank isn't even the CEO anymore. I'm behind on their podcast, okay? I don't know the structure. Hank has, of course, responsibility because he's the person in the video, and it is his company in a way, or he has a big involvement with the company, and he was one of the founders of the company, so he is responsible here, because essentially he's the one on in the video explaining all of it. So I get why people are mad about it, but you have to remember that SciShow is a company and more than one person than just Hank worked on this video. So he's not the only one responsible. So it's perfectly valid to have someone else than Hank write this comment, I think. And it's nice to know that there are knitters on the producing team of this video. And also, I think having a knitter's response and not Hank's response, who is not a knitter, might be very helpful. And also, there were a lot of technical knitting mistakes in this video, some of them due to stock images and such. We'll see that in this response, but I'm not going to talk about the technical mistakes. There's someone else out there who is a scientist and a knitter who does that a lot better than me, so I will link their video in the description. I didn't like the vibe of that video very much. I found it very angry, but in terms of technical response, it's a very good video. So I will link it down below because it is interesting and I did learn a lot by watching that. Anyhow, so to address the technical knitting mistakes, at the top of the video we describe one early example of knitted fabric. You can see the piece we're referring to at this link. We weren't able to secure permission to show this image in the video. The fabric of this item is a 2-needle knitting, but our description of it as a pattern of knots does more accurately describe knot binding, a technique that has been a precursor to knitting but is mechanically very different. At different points in the video they showed a woven fabric, not a knitted fabric, and a reverse stockinette, not stockinette. That's a knitting stage image. Part the second. Expertise, trial and error. To give an honest peek behind the curtain, this video was a trial in its own for SciShow. We didn't know how knitting as a topic would land with our audience, or if the video would be seen by knitters who didn't already watch SciShow. Turns out our first error was thinking we wouldn't reach the audience of knitters who are also excited about science. We're grateful for the people in that Venn diagram who've given it a watch. The next error of this trial is the simplifying language throughout the video. In every video SciShow makes, we take a scientific expertise and make it accessible to a general audience. In many ways, as general an audience as possible, because we believe everyone has a right to learn. Where we added caveats and simplifications, we weren't intending to alienate knitters or misinterpret the craft. Rather, we were intending to engage and invite non-knitters to learn about this craft that's got way more going on than they may have imagined. To mention a couple of specific choices, at a few points we used the word knots to refer to places in the fabric where 2 yarns touch. Knitting doesn't produce knots to create fabric. We kept knots in places as a stand-in for places in fabric where 2 yarns touch. We didn't talk about the many aspects of knitting that affect how a fabric behaves: needle size, yarn weight, fiber content, gauge, tension, blocking, the list could go on. The research we're reporting on is specifically focused on stitch type and construction, so we limited the scope of the video to match. I think that's a very fair response that a lot of people miss, because this, again, is not a video about knitting as a craft and the history of knitting. It's about a specific stitch, which is the basic knitting stitch, that can give fabric certain properties that are helpful for other uses than just clothes. The goal of this video was to demonstrate that through knitting and knit fabric might seem simple and ubiquitous, their versatility, complexity, and beauty have far-reaching applications, just as I said. I want to finally touch on the line at the end of the video that says knitting was developed via intuition, practice, trial and error. The experienced knitter in me can see how that line leaves out the mathematical complexity and skill that knitting can employ. The hobbyist knitter in me is grateful that knitting doesn't have to be complex to be worthwhile. Yes, you don't always have to do math. Sometimes, or most of the times if you want to, counting is enough. Okay, last sentence. The SciComp producer in me knows that intuition, practice, trial and error are exactly the way science happens, and it can really be as simple as that. Thank you so much to everyone who's watching. So I actually think that this response was pretty nice. Some people also thought that it should have been more visible because this was a pinned comment, but I think that would have made it unnecessarily more dramatic. It's a good response if you go to the comments to leave a comment and be like, hey, there are mistakes, blah blah. You immediately see this comment and you can read it and you can see that they're on it and they read the comments, which is actually very good for a company like this to do. Like, they show that they read the comment and take the critique and try to do something with it. And I think this is a really nice explanation for which choices were made in the video, and I think that's very fair and we shouldn't complain about this. However, this response doesn't respond to the comments of misogyny, and ignoring that is a big part of the critique. So let's see if Hank's response adds anything to that.
Hello, it's Hank. I've read a lot of comments about knitting in the last week. I've also watched some videos about knitting, and I've learned a lot about knitting in the last week. I haven't really known how to deal with this, like how to talk about it, which is why I haven't done it yet. Because, in part because like I host SciShow, and I, a couple of years ago, for the reason that you're thinking, I stepped down from being in charge of that. And when you do that, you like give up the power, and you don't want to like barge back in sometimes and be like, actually, I need the power back. So can I be in control for a little while, you guys? I know the SciShow team takes critique seriously, and I've watched them enact their policies a bunch of times, and I don't butt in there. It would be bad for me to do that as a person who is not the boss. But clearly, there's a child. Who's that? He's looking at my car. I have not had the chance to, and I think that this was infecting the way that I was talking about it, to like understand knitting as the tremendous bonkers technology that it is. And the videos I watched were like good and in good faith, and so were almost all of the comments I saw, including the ones that said to show my contrition, I should knit a pair of socks. Even one person suggesting I knit a pair of socks without a pattern. Which, please don't make me do that.
I think one of the best quality people on the internet can have is admitting that they're wrong and learning from their mistakes, which is what a lot of people on the internet cannot seem to do. Like, admitting your mistakes is very hard. I know that. I have had to do that. Well, every human has to do that at some point in their life, probably multiple times in small and big ways, whatever. It's very hard to do, but publicly on the internet, when you're such a public figure as Hank Green, it's very hard. And I admire him for doing that. It's what he should do, but again, a lot of people aren't even thinking about doing that and are just vaulting over everyone, so the fact that he does that is a good thing. Hank obviously learned that knitting is a lot more complex than he originally thought. There are still people in the comments that are mad because he didn't explicitly say, I'm sorry. Well, he said, I want to apologize, which is close enough to me. I'm sorry is in the description. He said, I want to apologize. That's enough. And people are still mad because the misogyny wasn't explicitly mentioned, which he indeed did not. But a big part of the misogynistic vibe people got from the original video was from Hank putting the words knitting and simple in the same sentence multiple times, which I feel got corrected with this video. I still think addressing the intersectionality between knitting and misogyny would have been very important, but I feel like it would have been most important to do that directly in a note, maybe before the video even started, because you're not, as SciShow, going to explain that entire thing, because first of all, again, the video was not about that, and second of all, it's a very complicated topic to explain in its entirety, and I did not do that either in this video. I don't think Hank is making the situation worse by not addressing it. I don't think in another way. He's not making the world worse. I mean, misogyny in general, maybe this specific situation, but not the world. And I think that's the most important thing here. Are you making the world worse here with your videos that you're posting on the internet? And it might be just better to let go of this entire drama thing right now, because we have heard all the points of views here now, hopefully. I think that Hank learning that knitting socks is actually very complicated might have been the best possible outcome here, because, you know, this entire thing also has a prequel involving knit socks, which is Hank's new bean app, where you have a bean in your phone and you can set a focus timer, and once you finish the focus timer, your bean has knit a certain amount of socks, and you can exchange the socks for furniture. If you pay for the premium version, the bean in your phone also knits scarves, implying that knitting a scarf, because it's bigger, is also a longer taking or harder or more money worth whatever experience. But the truth is that knitting socks often takes longer than knitting a scarf, because you can use thicker yarn when knitting a scarf, and it's a lot easier because you can just go back and forth and you don't have to do complicated bends and such. So Hank already had to learn that knitting socks is harder than knitting scarves. So again, it's great that I think that Hank learned that knitting socks is hard, and some part of me hopes that Hank tries knitting socks very soon. That would be great. I would love to see that. As I said when I interjected before, there's one more response I need to share with you, which is important to get the entire picture. I had to dive on Reddit to find this, by the way. I might have not looked in the right place or whatever, but it was not particularly very easy to find. It reads, "Hello SciShow viewers, earlier this month we published a video about knitting and physics that missed the mark, and we have now pulled that video. If you read nothing else, just know that while we were certainly not trying to be dismissive of knitting and knitters, we understand how it came across and we should have done better. Our intention was to share some physics of knitting that we were really excited about. That being said, we did not achieve what we set out to do. We were overwhelmed with the feedback on this video and we wanted to take the time to process everything earnestly. We get a lot of critique at SciShow and we used our established policies to review the work in our initial correction, but that fell short. Our biggest miss was how some of the language we used in the video fit into a very long history of diminishing the work and innovation of people who have made and continue to make textiles. We are really sorry for that. Ultimately, fabric is one of the foundational technologies of human civilization, and the reason it is treated as less exciting or important than other technologies is because it has traditionally been the work of women. We regret the ways it may have undermined the actual goal of the video, which was to demonstrate that though knitting and knit fabric might seem simple and ubiquitous to some, the versatility, complexity, and beauty of this craft has far-reaching applications, which knitters have been known for as long knitting has existed. This video lacked that important historical context. In hindsight, we can see how incorporating it would have strengthened not only our scientific narrative, but the entire story overall. There are no immediate plans to rework this specific video, but we have learned a lot from this experience. We are excited that there is a passionate audience from content like this, and we are committed to doing a better job when making content about textiles, fiber, and knitting in the future. I want to state, for the record, that our team does have tremendous respect for the incredible legacy of fiber artists, and we are deeply sorry for the mismatched tone of the video. It is also truly impressive what the fiber arts community is already doing here on this platform, and we are grateful to all of you who took the time to engage with us in good faith. Sincerely, Nicole Sweeney, executive producer. So I think that reply basically encompasses every critique we have seen so far and is fair. I still don't think that the video, the original video, was a net negative for fiber arts women in general and whatever. I still do think that the historical context, even in a little comment in the beginning of the video, might have helped a lot and might have made the video a lot better. So I think incorporating the historical context would have been important, but I also think that, again, the internet lacks a lot of nuance, and I think that we should be a little kinder to each other, because I've seen a lot of not so kind comments in this entire process. It's good to be alert for misogyny and stuff like this. That's very great. The situation is a lot more nuanced than the internet shows it to be. It's not just that the video was bad. It was pretty okay and pretty interesting, I think, and it just lacked some very important information, which could have been added later. Anyways, conclusion of the video, that's still kind of sense. Okay, fine. In the end, I think it's always important to think about what you add to a conversation when posting a video on the internet or maybe even commenting, but people have made a lot of videos about that, and I'm adding to the pile too, I know that, but I think it's best to think before you post, because when you're high in your anger emotion because of this, which I again understand, it might not be the right time to post. I think it would be better for everyone if you think about what you post and try to put it in a more nuanced way, instead of being like, I'm angry, Hank is misogynistic a-hole and we should never look at him ever again, and also he should explicitly say that he's sorry and he's a misogynist, because I don't think that's true. I think that Hank is trying to be respectful, and I think that he, as a wise man, has a lot of internalized stuff going on, which doesn't excuse it again, and again, it might be better still if he says something about it, but he's not the big bad evil guy of this world, because again, as I said, I am binge listening to podcasts of John Green and Hank Green, and I'm having an absolute blast, but if there's something I took from that, is that the Green brothers are trying to approach topics from a respectful point of view, whatever it is, from a nuanced point of view. And again, this might not have been very nuanced, and I think everyone is in the wrong here, and I think I am also in the wrong here with this video that I'm making, because I cannot be right, because there is no right in this conversation. There's no 100% right. Some people might not, well, semantics. Anyways, I don't think Hank is evil. That's the point here. I think we shouldn't blast him for this anymore. He tried, and he has learned something, and he will try to do better next time. I'm sure of that. And if he doesn't, we can blast him again. I do hope I could add some nuance to the conversation, and at least you know now why all knitters, or not all knitters, but why a lot of knitters are mad at Hank Green of all people. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please press the wonderful shiny like and subscribe buttons, and then I will see you next time. Ciao!